Assalamu alaikum. Today we're going to cover something very peculiar. It's called the purposeless conjunction. Purposeless conjunction, and we will elaborate inshallah. It deals with the importance of paying attention to everything in the Quran. A while ago, I was part of a group. We studied every morning on Saturday, every Saturday morning at the mosque. We used to get together and study and memorize parts of the Quran. And there was a highly educated sheikh, scholar, religious scholar, who would teach us and would help us memorize and would provide commentary on the verses that we were memorizing. And we got to verse number 19 of Surah Al-Qasas. And I remember stopping at that verse and asking questions. That verse says, فَلَمَّا أَنْ أَرَادَ أَنْ يَبْطِشَ بِالَّذِي هُوَ عَدُوٌّ لَهُمَا. And it translates roughly as, for when he was intending to destroy the one who was a common enemy to both of them. And that verse stopped me because it has a conjunction, an, that seemed to ring wrong in my ear. فَلَمَّا أَنْ أَرَادَ. Because in Arabic, we don't say فَلَمَّا أَنْ أَرَادَ. It's like, in English, if you want to say the same thing, for when he too wanted to kill, right? It doesn't make sense. The first two does not make sense. But yet here it is in the Quran very plainly, فَلَمَّا أَنْ أَرَادَ. It was clearly trying to tell us something. So I stopped and I asked the sheikh. And to my surprise, he says, oh, that's an extraneous term, an extraneous conjunction. I said extraneous as in, useless, purposeless. He says, yeah, there are many such, terms in the Quran, and scholars know about them, and they're, documented. And I remember feeling very wrong about that answer. I remember going home that same day feeling depressed, and I decided, to search. Maybe he was wrong. And sure enough, I looked through whatever I could get my hands on in terms of books of commentary on the Quran, and they all either dismissed the issue, didn't address it at all, like they considered it normal, or pretended it wasn't there. And a few of them confirmed what the sheikh said, which is it is purposeless, za'ida. And I found that really depressing. As a matter of fact, that sent me into a crisis mode that lasted for a long time. And then after a while, I decided to dismiss the issue and not focus on it. And I, decided that maybe they're wrong. There must be a reason for this. Fast forward to the last 2 years where I've been working on translating the Quran. And I got to Surah number 28. And I got back to that same verse. And then I couldn't translate that verse, assuming that this an, this extra conjunction, as they said, was not there. I could not translate it and be honest. I could not deal with the seriousness of the task at hand and simply dismiss that extra an. And that forced me to really dig. As a matter of fact, that stopped my project of translating the Quran for more than 2 months, really searching. And then I started to uncover all sorts of different things. And that led me to understand the Surah of Al-Qasas, which tells the story of Prophet Musa in his early years. The years before the actual exodus from Egypt. That led me to understand that surah in a totally different way. And then I started looking through the surah again, and it started opening up new concepts and new meanings. So what I learned, just to summarize, the purpose of that an, which is not extraneous at all, is that it is reporting to us a variation, a difference, a big contrast between the story of the Quran and the story that the commentators brought from the Torah, brought from the Old Testament. In summary, because we don't have a lot of time to really dig through all the evidences, the new story that revealed itself in the Quran goes as following. When Prophet Musa, he wasn't a prophet at that time, in his youth, he was part of a gang. He was not living, in a posh situation at the palace of Pharaoh. And I know this is shocking to a lot of you because that's exactly what we were told because the Torah says so. But the Quran does not say that at all. And I will, inshallah, at a future date, talk about the details of how I reached this conclusion. And I know that there are some verses that say, the family of Pharaoh picked him up and his wife said this. And I know all of these things because I dug through the whole story. But I assure you, that story from the Torah is not what the Quran is talking about. The Quran is telling us a different story. So to make a long story short, Prophet Musa, or Musa at that time, Moses, was part of a gang. And that gang operated in a certain neighborhood where his mother's house existed. So he entered the city in quiet, in secret, right? At night, at a time where the people of the city, or at least that neighborhood, were not aware of him. And he found two people fighting. One of them from his gang, and one of them from the gang of the opposite neighborhood. And he killed the one from his own clan, in other words, from the people of the Israelite. So he hid, and the Quran tells us he hid and he was very afraid. And the second day, the person from the other clan, who is actually his boss, because he was a double agent, he entered the place where Musa was, and he was yelling at him. And he was yelling at him. He wanted to kill him, but not directly. He wanted to let the people around Musa's mother's home, her neighborhood, know that Musa killed one of them. In other words, the enemy of Musa wanted his own people to kill him. So it was an indirection. So he was yelling and telling people in a loud voice that you are about to kill me just like you killed one person yesterday. So that indirection is referred to by the conjunction an. فَلَمَّا أَنْ أَرَادَ. He wanted to kill Musa, but he did not want to kill him directly. He wanted somebody else to kill him. Now, as I reviewed the surah of Al-Qasas, number 28, I found the same an in other places. So for example, in verse number 7, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing how he revealed to Musa's mother the instructions. وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى أُمِّ مُوسَى أَنْ أَرْضِعِيهِ. Here's an, here it is. And I thought, okay, أَنْ أَرْضِعِيهِ, I understand this one. أَوْحَيْنَا, we revealed to her. It's not a direct command. It came through angels, or it came through some sort of revelation that, materialized in her mind. There's an indirection there. But that stopped me at another issue, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was ordering Musa's mother to nurse him, to suckle him, and ardi'i, to suckle him. And I thought, what mother would need to have such an instruction? Why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us about this in the Quran? Is this extraneous again? And of course, it turned out that it's not extraneous. And this opened up a whole new discovery for me about the surah. And so on and so forth. As I started unraveling, it was like pulling a string from a piece of spaghetti from a spaghetti bowl. The more I pulled, the more the story became different than the story that was told in the Torah. And then eventually I came to verse number 30 of the same surah, which says, فَلَمَّا أَتَاهَا نُودِيَ مِنْ شَاطِئِ الْوَادِ الْأَيْمَنِ فِي الْبُقْعَةِ الْمُبَارَكَةِ مِنَ الشَّجَرَةِ أَنْ يَا مُوسَى. Here's أَنْ يَا مُوسَى إِنِّي أَنَا اللَّهُ رَبُّ الْعَالَمِينَ. I said, okay, here's an again. If an is used in verse number 7, which is an indirect call to Musa's mother, that means an to Musa was also an indirect call. And yet they told us that God spoke directly to Musa. But yet here it's very clear that Allah spoke indirectly to Musa, meaning through some intermediary. And I thought, is that possible? And then I searched the Quran and I found it in the very next verse. In the very next verse, An alqi asak. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is continuing with his instructions to Musa in verse number 31 of the same surah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and then throw your staff, cast your staff. And the an alqi asak, an exists also in that verse. And then I searched through other stories and I found the same an in verse number 37, verse number 37, 104, meaning surah of 37, number 104, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the story of Ibrahim, Prophet Abraham. And he says, وَنَادَيْنَاهُ أَنْ يَا إِبْرَاهِيمُ. Here it is again, an. Therefore, an is an indirection in the case of Ibrahim, because nobody ever claimed that God spoke directly, personally, in his own voice to Ibrahim. And therefore, it's the same style, it's the same structure. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making a point to us, to identify to us that what you guys were taught about God speaking directly to Moses is not true. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was making that point by including the conjunction an at least 4 times in Surah Al-Qasas and countless other times in other places. I found it also in Surah Yusuf. Regardless, the point is that when you see something that sounds or looks questionable, it is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, stop, investigate, listen, pay attention. That little nagging voice inside of you is actually God pointing you to something and saying, ask the question, figure out why it's so. Why is it not as you expected? So that was one of the important moral of this story. The other moral of the story is that this language is not the language of the Arabs. The Arabs did not speak this way. This so-called extraneous conjunction, an, the scholars, all linguistic scholars and religious scholars, called it extraneous, which proves that they were not familiar with it. They did not understand why it's there, and therefore they simply dismissed it out of hand, which proves that was not their language that the Quran was using. And this is very controversial, I know, but if you bear with me throughout the many coming segments, that we will cover a lot of such issues, and we will deal with a very detailed methodology that builds on all of these concepts. And finally, one last moral of this story is that this also proves that the scribes and the countless generations who preceded us, who copied the Quran, generation after generation after generation, and brought it to us, all of them did not change the Quran. They kept it. They made sure that it's not changed, even though they disagreed with its structure. They clearly did not like the fact that there is an extraneous an. So this poor an, which for 1400 years was thought of as extraneous, turned out to be an unbelievable gift, a key that helped me uncover many, many discoveries about the stories of the Quran, and this is one of them. I hope this was useful to you. I hope you will stick with me and continue to watch and subscribe to this channel, because what's coming is a lot more amazing stuff that inshallah we will cover in the future. Thank you for watching.